This is the restraint it shows.
What's the point of being a multi-millionaire if you can't build yourself a mountain fortress?
This one seems unfinished.
It's hard to find people to do construction during demonic invasions.
And welcome back to Shadow Warrior. First of all, I'd like to apologize a bit, not for my atrocious timing, that goes without saying, but as you can tell, this video is long and most of it will be tedious, so I'm going to use it to wrap up a lot of things I wanted to talk about and didn't get to. To start it off, this level. Chapter 13 is the worst level in the game by far. Now don't get me wrong, I love this game, I wouldn't be LPing it if I didn't. Even now, after about 6 playthroughs and countless practice runs, I can still boot up just about any level in the game and have fun with it. Except for this one. It's almost as if they took every single complaint I had in the previous videos about the design flaws of the previous levels, they put them there and somehow made them worse. So let's start with the issue in front of us, so to speak, and talk about the egg traps. We've encountered them before and they were just annoying.
Pregnant yak?
This, by the way, is another take on a classic quote, where in the original game, "You move like a pregnant yak" was one of the baritones in Wang's repertoire. At least in my opinion. Anyhow, eggs on snow. The thing about the snow is that it makes the lighting effects go all over the place. It's pretty, but the eggs kind of glow from within, which makes the snow around them turn green, and the reflection from it turned the eggs itself white. It's a pain in the ass to spot them, and the game loves placing them in the snowy bits of this level. That being said, there are not that many of those. Most of this level actually takes place in a much more boring environment. Now allow me to sidetrack a bit here. I believe a big reason why other people have expressed their dislike of this level in the thread is the platforming sections. Someone even asked me to run a count of how many times do I die from falling damage during the practice runs. Your answer is 0. I did, however, die about 4 times when recording because of the slowdown generated by the recording software. The platforming sections here are not that bad. They are all very clear on where you need to jump and when you need to land, which makes them, in my opinion, finicky, but that's what platforming in FPS games always is, but rather easily handled as opposed to something sneaky like the death boat. Really, the worst part about them is that there are secrets in them and those are really easy to miss. So whatever feelings I have towards this level, they are not caused by the abundance of platforming sections. There is, however, a somewhat related problem to them that's a lot worse, and that's backtracking. You've just seen a locked door, and we'll need to get back to that by making pretty much a full circle of the level, including the platforming section. I wouldn't mind this if they used it to do something interesting, like placing a couple of fights there, maybe even spared some egg traps and flyers around the platforming sections, which would be annoying, sure, but it would be challenging. But to put like this, it just wastes time. And that's the biggest issue with this level, in my opinion. It's padding. This entire level is padding, and it will never be more obvious than when we get to its end, because it finishes with a literal slap to the face of the player. Even the fight we are in right now is symptomatic of it. There's a shaman hiding behind a wall of shield jerks which he can replenish at will. It's basically stalling incarnate. It's slow, it's boring, and absolutely nothing happens in there. You can't even use the explosive barrels, right, because, well, shield jerks. Another thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the weapon I'm using instead of my katana. This is the second alternate skin I have, and it's the Excalibur from the remake of Rise of the Triad. I'm not particularly familiar with that game, or the original, and the reason why I picked it can be summed up thusly. It makes a certain cutscene in this level much more interesting. That green shrine, by the way, makes pretty much no sense, because it's set on a linear path right before the door it opens, and it only allows us to get back on track under the whole jumping section. This level on the whole feels extremely rough and unpolished, especially compared to the amount of effort put into designing most of the other levels in the game. if you're wondering why I didn't cut out any of this, it's because there will be absolutely no jump cuts in this level whatsoever. That is I wouldn't really call it an artistic decision, but it's a conscious one. I feel in order to understand what I'm bitching about the entire time, this level must be experienced in its entirety. You'll be glad to hear you're not getting the authentic first time experience though, because there is no wandering around trying to figure out where the hell am I supposed to go in all those doors that look the same, and most of them aren't even doors anyway. By now you had the chance to take in the glorious environment we'll be spending most of the levels in, the construction site. I know a lot of gamers have issues with sewers, but I've personally always found construction sites worse. Especially in an action-packed fun ride like this game is. I mean, this is Shadow Warrior, right? We're expecting racism, explosions, violence, gibs, and not fighting in a place that looks like 90% of Max Payne 2. And mind you, that game used its bleak environments to make a point. Here it's just there.
If the Whisperer is imprisoned, maybe Zilla still has the sword with him.
And maybe you're delivering the other two pieces to him on a silver platter.
Maybe. Eye of the Tiger, Hoji. Eye of the Tiger.
You know he loses in that first movie, right?
But he gets the girl.
The cutscene quickly brings us to another thing I wanted to talk about in one of the videos, and it just ended up to be this one, and that is the plot. Or rather plots, because this game really has two intertwined storylines going on. Now, I've been throwing the word around a bit willy-nilly, but what it all comes down to is that in this particular game, the story and the plot are quite distant from each other. It's way more elaborate than you'd expect from a shooter, and I love it. There's a really good comment recurring in the thread about how unreal it is to live in a world where the remake of Shadow Warrior has better plot and writing than the remake of Thief. Now, well, that is probably more caused by whichever idiot decided that the best course for the Thief games is to strip Garrett of everything that made him memorable, but the truth is that there's a surprising amount of depth to the plot of Shadow Warrior 2013. Now, the developers actually have a pretty good precedent for this with Hard Reset and its plot, whatever the hell it was. Now, the main issue with that game was that its plot, i.e. the sequence of events that took place, was pretty much hiding behind its story, that is, how we are told about them. And it is very similar in this game, although much more competently handled. Recall, if you will, how puzzled I was about Wang's motivations in regards to Zilla. And even when that got cleared up by the thread, he still remains a somewhat contrary character in my eyes.
Your men are dead. You're alone.
Yes, but you still can't take the sword. That must be frustrating.
Where is the Whisperer?
Oh, your little courier? Your fiends will never find it. You only needed to be patient and let me finish things. Lo Wang will be here soon to deliver the other two swords to me.
He will kill you.
And why would he do that?
He allied himself with my brother Hoji.
Bullshit.
You sent him for one sword, not two. How did he find the other, or this place?
Because he's...
I cannot let Hoji take this sword. Kill Lo Wang, and I will reinstate our original bargain.
Me? Kill him?
Take these. Black tears. A taste of the price we agreed upon.
Now this is more like it. Wait, I can smell him. Lo Wang is already here.
Be careful, he...
Careful is for the weak. Don't you agree, Lo Wang? Whatever you were up to, Wang, it ends here. So in the end, A mongrel will be a mongrel, biting the hand of its master.
Spare me the mentoring, Zilla. Right now, you're just another name on my list.
What is... No! No, you can't!
What's happening?
He's taking me back! You can't do this!
Hoji!
And that's why you bring a bat to a sword fight.
Zilla! Where are you?
Now, to break from the ranting a little and focus on the fight at hand, you want to kill the Warlord as soon as possible, and it's something I kind of failed at during this run. Now, the rockets are real powerful, but mostly on a direct hit, and there is this tiny little wall in front of the Warlord. It reaches about to its knees, but somehow I managed to hit it with 2 out of the 3 rockets I fired that way. Which means the fucker is still alive and kicking, and enjoying it immensely, I might add, when a shaman joins the fray. Now, Warlords and shamans get a whole new meaning when they're together, because their abilities synergize really well. Shamans will raise corpses, and Warlord will immediately enrage them, making the enemies much more dangerous than they would be normally. And that's really the main reason why I'm going after the Warlords first in just about any encounter that features multiple large enemies. Well, that and Warlords are considerably easier to kill because they have less health and don't have the fuck-all barrier attacks that can stop a missile in flight. This is also where I start really abusing Flux, because from this point on, shield jerks pretty much become the default go-to enemy and will come at us in numbers normally reserved only for crawlers. So yeah, if you think all those chi crystals I've been throwing into a spell I'm almost not using were wasted, the joke's on you. Now, since we've run out of just about everything that made this fight even somewhat interesting and the rest is all cleanup, let's get back on track with the plot talk. I mentioned before that Shadow Warrior has 2 plots, and they're incorporated into one storyline. Let's go back to the encounter we just had with Zilla. To me it always felt really convenient. It saved Wang the issue of having to make a decision whether he's still with Zilla or whether he wants to kill him. I know that Wang wanting to backstab Zilla from the beginning is the most likely interpretation, but I still like to think there was a little moral maneuvering space. I mean, yeah, sure, we know Zilla is a bad guy, he can't not be with that thing. But then again, are we a good guy? Let's talk a bit about the structure of a story. The basis of a story is conflict, and in games and movies and similar consumer-oriented media, the conflict is generally about good or evil, but the definitions of good or evil can vary. Is Wang a good guy because he's trying to stop Zilla from achieving what exactly? Is Zilla a bad guy because he's trying to achieve it? And who made all of those demons appear in the first place? Now this is where the second, and in my opinion more interesting plot kicks in, and we start learning about the whole issue with the Shadow Realm. Let me just check. No, still nothing interesting happening. So, the Shadow Realm. We know that our supposed big bad is a guy called Enra, who works with Zilla and is the ruler of the Shadow Realm. But what is he trying to do? We are again coming back to the intro video, which I keep suggesting you rewatch.
How to use that thing, Grasshopper?
Thing is, by now, we know who it is that's narrating it. And using various characters from the story to slowly divulge information to us, as far as they know.
To a more interesting venue. See you at the top of the mountain, Llewellyn. If you survive that long.
On a side note, now that we don't have Hoji, we will occasionally be taunted by Zilla over the intercom. It's a very poor substitute. And probably a part of why this level is so lackluster. Right, rant mode engaged. In literature, this technique is called Unreliable Narrator, and I'm a big fan of it. It's mainly for two reasons. One, because it allows the player to puzzle out the plot for himself. And two, if I may paraphrase one of the greatest masters of this technique, Gene Wolfe, every human being is an unreliable narrator, whether they realize it or not. In our case, Wang's journey of discovery of what actually happened at the Shadow Realm is directly determined by the characters he comes into contact with. The game actually even calls attention to it when, back in chapter 6, Hoji taunts Gozu about how he's so stupid that Enra would obviously not trust him with any important information. And so, when we find out about the story in those flashbacks, we need to keep in mind that those flashbacks are heavily influenced by the characters that are supposed to have them. It's not that they are not telling us everything, they might not know everything, they may be openly lying. And even what they decide to focus on and what they decide to omit from their memory can be somewhat telling. Gozu and Mazu both knew the full story, but they decided to focus on different aspects of it. And then there's Hoji, who is extremely knowledgeable about Shadow Realm, but he doesn't seem to know anything about its fall, about the whole story of the betrayal, the revolution, the girl and the rain. But he is our main source of information about Enra, and I believe his kindest comment is that Enra is a bar-tripping dickhead. Every single source of information we have in this game is an unreliable narrator. Let's go back to the game for a bit. You probably noticed that I went for a secret that was hidden in a completely optional area with an optional fight, but in this case the optional fight consisted of 3 flyers. Amazing. What's a bit harder to notice just watching it is that we are making big circles around the levels and basically trying to break key shrines while returning to the big circular room. The first round trip netted us the red key shrine, and that's a fairly funny one because there are actually 2 red barriers, at least in theory. I learned of this by accident and sadly after having recorded this video, because I had to run through the level once more since I forgot to go to the next level and I didn't have a save from the LP run as a result. But one of the red barriers is actually located at the exit of this room. It's supposed to make sure you didn't miss the shrine, which is entirely possible. The only real problem with it is that, well, it's not there. The hallway we just exited is sealed by the red seal, but the seal itself can be passed through. I'd like to think that this just means that the beta testers hated this level as much as I do. Now we are back in the room with the globe, and there is another battle awaiting us, and this one is actually kind of a pain. We get both kinds of Haridans working together, and this poses a considerable threat, because enraged Haridans are fucking scary. I talked about how their deal is that they are pretty much guaranteed to get some hits in, and ranged Haridans, while they don't do that much damage, work as a really great distraction, because you're simply aware of their projectiles and you know you're being shot at, and that makes you ignore the melee ones teleporting behind you, and that makes you ignore the melee ones, which are the real threat. On the other hand, if you ignore the ranged ones and try to bust down the melee before they get enraged and tear you apart into combos, which is essentially what I did here, you will get slowly whittled down by dandruff bolts. It's a situation where you have to choose the lesser of 2 evils, and you either need to be extremely aware of the enemy's positions, or keep a constant watch on your health meter. Now, the next section can, and probably did, fool a lot of first-time players, because the door we actually need to enter in order to progress is not in the circular room, it's in fact in the first room of the path we already took. While there is the golden glow that marks progress, the player will be inclined to disbelieve it, especially if he managed to have a run-in with the pass-through red barrier. That suggests a certain glitchiness to the level. Also, the fact that the environment is so samey doesn't help either. There are really no landmarks apart from the globe room. Okay, so back to Dead Air Aside 101. What I was going to point out is that everything we find out about the villains of our story is filtered throughout a large layer of bias and prejudice. Mazu's flashback told us that Enra ultimately wants to revive the girl, and he needs to sacrifice an ancient in order to do it, which is why he requires the magical blood sword. Why does he want to do it?
Fuck it. I've had enough of this old school shit.
By the way, I think Wang is once again speaking straight from the player's heart here. Now, we were actually told Enra's motivation pretty explicitly in one of the cutscenes, but it was rather cleverly disguised as a poetic metaphor, so I'll leave it at it for now. But there's a different point to all of this, and it concerns the whole story is based on conflict deal.
Stop! Wait.
This quote, as far as I can tell, is completely new for this game. Also, the flamethrower was most definitely not the weapon to use here, but I had this vague concept of fried eggs that I found amusing. It doesn't work, and don't try this at home. I'd also like you to draw your attention towards the pacing here, because while we did take forever in order to get to the red shrine, the blue and green ones are very close to one another, and they are on the same path. I hate to sound like a broken record, but this level feels really crude and unpolished and unfinished and undone and untested and just about anything you can think of. That's not to say it's completely terrible, because we are right now nearing what's probably the only good fight in the entire thing. I'm not really sure why they put the recharge room in front of it, because it's not that difficult, but I like it. It's a good callback to the old school shooters, which had rooms filled with health and ammo right in front of bosses and hard fights. Anyway, this encounter. There's a Warlord on the lower floor, and it needs to be killed as soon as possible, because there's also a shaman on the upper floor you can't see and you can't get to until you deal with the shield jerks. The shield jerks start near the shaman and run for you as soon as you show up, which means they both indicate and block the path you need to take. Then they force a decision on you. You can stay on the lower level to deal with the Warlord and shield jerks, but then you have to account with a constant stream of skeletons and the occasional resurrected shield jerk. Or you can go up, ignore the chaff and go for the shaman, but then the shield jerks you left down there will start pelting you with their homing projectiles. And if you left that Warlord alive, then you're essentially fucked. This is a really great example of the room layout playing towards the monster's strength in order to create an interesting and intense battle. But it's sadly placed in the middle of this level, so I cheesed the shit out of it with the rocket launcher and the demon head. A little note on the flamethrower and why am I using it here despite it obviously not doing much damage. Firebombs are great against shamans, because if a shaman is on fire and it summons a skeleton, the skeleton will catch fire too. If a skeleton isn't enraged, it's the weakest enemy in the game, and it's entirely possible it will burn out before it actually gets to it. Sadly, there's also the option of it just panicking and turning around, and then you have to chase it, and if it happens to be a barrier skeleton, then you just prolong the battle by at least 20 seconds. But this room is small enough for this to be easily controllable. Now what I don't really get is the second wave, because after you get rid of the shaman, the warlord, the shield jerks, and basically everything that poses any kind of threat to you, you'll be treated to a couple of crawlers and birdmen starting to snipe at you from the other side of the room. And I keep failing at trying to use the crossbow, because I don't wait for them to actually attack before I let the bolt fly, which means they can easily sidestep it. Think of it as a showcase of how elaborate some of the guns in this game are. And totally not... Stop moving, goddammit! See, even I can't watch that. Anyway, that's another classic quote.
Why do you oppose me, Wang? Think how much we could accomplish if we joined forces. Hand over the sword and I will forgive your insubordination.
Come on, Wang. Not even a Star Wars joke? We're coming up on the boring construction bits again, so let's wrap up what I was going on about the story. I think we've demonstrated clearly enough that good against evil is not exactly a case we can make for this game's plot. So I'd like to propose a different interpretation. I propose that this game's conflict is about selflessness against selfishness. Or, if you will, loyalty to oneself versus loyalty to something else. A person, a cause, possibly higher, but certainly different. Remember what Wang says to Kyokagami before he blows them up? You two are far too loyal to Zilla for my tastes. Remember what Hoji keeps saying to the other ancients? Yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir? It's basically the same deal. Both Wang and Hoji are essentially walking egos. Hell, the entirety of Wang's motivation, of him having convinced himself that Zilla is the cause of the demonic invasion, while, as we can infer from Zilla and Enra's dialogue, the whole thing was started because Wang and Kokagami failed to actually get the swords. You probably don't remember it, but way back in the prologue, one of the last things we can hear from Zilla on the TV is, "Wait, there's still time, I have things under control." So I think it's fairly sure to assume that it's just Endra getting tired of this and decided to take the swords for himself, using the Whisperers, as opposed to whatever deal he had worked out with Zilla. Ah, here comes that pesky gameplay again. Upgrading. I'm buying the multi-launch upgrade for the rocket launcher, which allows me to stock up to 3 missiles and then fire them at once. In most situations it's overkill, but 3 direct rocket hits can kill a Warlord, and as I explained, that's what you want to do whenever possible. Right, villain Hoji. The thing about Zilla and Endra is that they both have plans, bigger plans. Endra wants to revive the girl, Zilla has his deal, which presumably involves him getting out of that wheelchair and finishing his mountain fortress of doom. Compared to them, Wang and Hoji play it really loose. Wang kills the demons literally because they are there. Wang kills the demons literally because they are there to be killed. Of course, they are doing collateral damage and he has the skills to fight them, but it's all about him thinking that he's a hero. Hoji is even worse. He wants to get the sword literally in order to prevent Endra from getting it. Remember that Hoji doesn't know what Endra wants the sword for. He doesn't remember. The information in flashbacks is new to him too. I have to say, Zilla has mastered the insane life. Anyway, to sum it up, I believe the story's conflict is, at its base, about selflessness and selfishness, or about loyalty to oneself and about loyalty to a cause. Now, one of those is commonly attributed to good, and one of those is commonly attributed to evil, or heroes and villains, if it makes it easier to think of it that way in terms of stories. In the end, it all comes down to sacrifice. Who is sacrificing what and why? Throw in a good dose of discussion on whether the ends justify the means, and again, the game itself calls attention to it with that one quip about how Endra has gone to the pain of making a whole transdimensional invasion in order to get his hands on the sword. Let it stir a bit, and you have a story that not only breaks a lot of established conventions in a genre where no one expects it to, but also manages to ask some pretty pointed questions of the player himself, simply by making sure that the players will identify with Wang. Someone in the thread, and I apologize again for not remembering your names mostly, has expressed their joy about how the game allows you to play a homicidal comic book nerd without any pretenses that this is the kind of hero we'd be. And in a way that comment just cuts into the heart of the matter. You get to be a murderous nerd and you get to have a whole lot of fun with it. But in the end, are you in the right? I'm heavily reminded of a game called Spec Ops: The Line, which has a really good and really serious storyline about the stresses and the atrocities of war, and about how games glorify and entertain is that even a word? Them. I'm not going to compare the storyline of Shadow Warrior to that, because they work on completely different levels, but they possess a similar kind of message. Thus, empowerment, which is again something very strongly present in the game, not only on the whole player to Wang level, but also with all the level up systems and weapons upgrades, does it justify acting the way you do in the game? Now, while this may seem like a self-serving way of having something to talk about during this entire fucking terrible level, but it really isn't. I may be overthinking things, surely, and in fact it's pretty likely that I do, but I'd like you to at least try to remember and recall some of the things I talked about here, and use them as kind of optics to watch as the story will unfold further. I will freely admit that the timing is not the best, because I should have stuck this either right after the Mezu boss fight, when we are still freshly plotted, so to speak, or right before the next plot bit will happen, which won't be for a while. But I find it rather important for these things to be said and at least give you, the viewer, the option of using this sort of view on what is going to happen eventually. Shadow Warrior 2K13 is not your average shooter with your average story, but a lot of people may simply miss that on account of not actually expecting it to be anything more. For example, one of the reactions I see on the internet regularly, thankfully not on SA yet, is that the ending of this game is disappointing. I'd like to think that at least some of the ideas and thoughts I outlined in the rant
I think you dropped something. Oh, it's your blood.
could provide sort of a key to understanding why it is so. Okay, we're done. Currently we are fighting in our second cable car station of this level that follows a second platforming section of this level, and right now most players would probably be wondering why the fuck didn't the level end yet. There was a great possible ending point right after we left the construction site. There was a great possible ending point right before we reached this second cable car station. Hell, there is a great possible ending point right fucking now, but no, the level has to go on. And while the turret section is as satisfying as always, and this one in particular is pretty notable because it shows how stupidly long the range on the Zilla Industries machine gun is, doesn't really do much here. I mean, sure, it's logical we have to wait for the elevator to come, but why couldn't the elevator be coming during the fight we just had here? Why stuck yet another fight in the same room? This is padding of the worst kind. No invention, no new assets, and in the end, no fun. I mean, okay, fires getting torn apart probably never gets old, at least for me. I'm an easy man to entertain. However, it's stuck inside the longest level in the game that already goes on for way too long, and there's no reason for it to be there.
What's wrong, no way? Not feeling so powerful without your demon around.
Another rather missed opportunity here with Zilla. I think he still could be salvaged as somewhat of a sympathetic character before he turned on Wang, but here he goes full Saturday cartoon morning villain mode. And while the voice actor does ham it up rather nicely, especially when he laughs, it's something that here just reminds us that we could have Hoji with us and he could probably come up with something way better.
I wish you were in HD.
As well as keep Wang's animal instincts in line. I mean, is it a coincidence that the first time Wang actually tries to hit on these things is when Hoji is away? Mind you, this is still better than the original, where Wang had really terrible pickup lines for just about everything female he encountered. With one notable exception, but that doesn't really belong here. It's kind of a shame that they don't use the snowy mountains set piece a bit more. It really serves only as sort of an in-between between long boring building sections in the last level and this one. By the way, if you notice that rabbit sitting near the Buddha statue, that rabbit is a complete asshole. I managed to kill him by accident in most of my runs, and he always, without failure, turns into the black fuzzy avatar of vengeance. And it's managed to kill me before. To further add insult to injury, it's like the only rabbit to be found within the last 5 levels. Now there's one more thing on my checklist that I wanted to talk about here, and that's difficulty levels. You've probably noticed that I often talk about how things work on higher difficulties where they are more challenging but also take longer and are more boring to watch. And when I talk about hard difficulties, I always use Insane as the basis of the comparison. Insane is not the hardest difficulty in the game. It is, however, funnily enough, the hardest sane difficulty in the game. Above Insane, there is a level called Heroic, which, in addition to further buffing all enemy stats to the point of absurdity, also removes all checkpoints from levels. Now think on that, with context to what we've just seen. I haven't beaten the game on Heroic, and I honestly don't think I ever will. If there's a viewer who has, my hat's off to you, you're a bigger wank than I am. And, rather not coincidentally, we are coming up to the main reason why. 35 minutes into the worst fucking level in the game, Flying Wild Hog decided to throw in a fight that is a serious contender for the hardest encounter in the game and definitely the most obnoxious one. I've talked and talked and talked about the joys and sorrows of fighting berserkers, pairs of berserkers, and anything else berserker related. However, whenever we encountered them so far, it was in a wide open arena. So let's have a pair of berserkers in tiny rooms and hallways. First thing to remember here, if you get cornered, you're dead. No way out of it, the berserkers work in tandem, and if they manage to get your health down, which is very easy, you enter Soul Drain, and berserkers are the one enemy at which Soul Drain has absolutely no effect because you can't get through their backs. Another thing that makes this fight interesting, and I am doing air quotes as I'm saying that, is the setup of the arena, because a lot of these walls are actually breakable. That is breakable by the berserkers, not by you. On one side, this means they can give you a fair bit more of breathing room. On the other, it's very easy to be avoiding and baiting one berserker just to have the wall you are running towards bust down and the other one show its ugly mark. You can theoretically be aware of which walls are breakable and which are not, because they look slightly different. It's the concrete or cardboard. However, realistically speaking, you're in the middle of a fight with two berserkers, you're watching out for them, you don't really have the time to check the walls' textures. The key here is separation. I am doing a lot of dash and jump and katana shenanigans around both of them, but I would not be able to get away with this on higher difficulties, because I am healing myself quite a lot. So the best strategy here is to separate them. Get one of them to charge and one of them to slam, and then lead the charging one as far from the other as you can. The ideal solution is to get them divided to the point where one of them doesn't see either the other one or you, because then it'll just wander around aimlessly and look for wangs to smash. Of course, then you're opening yourself to the risk of the whole berserker smashing through the wall in your face surprise attack. But that's generally a much lower risk than having two of them constantly pursue you and constantly try to corner you. Getting cornered here is especially deadly because it's entirely possible that they get you simply to a situation you cannot get out of, health or not. It doesn't matter how much damage they do because you simply can't move through them, they block all the way. You might think that the developers decided to do something clever here with the walls, but no, those don't really stop their charge or even slow it down. This fight pretty much requires you to play it safe and check for a possible escape route before you try to go in for the damage. And that in turn will make you lose a lot of opportunities in which you could attack. Which in turn will make this level last even fucking longer. And that's a normal. On Insane you probably take about an hour to finally clear this fight, and on Heroic that's just unspeakable. You got that one right, Wang. About the only upside of this thing is that they do give out a shit ton of cards, which is obviously pretty much completely unnecessary at this point, because we already have all the significant upgrades. Thankfully, after killing one of the berserkers, finishing off the second one is just a formality, because this enemy is essentially hopeless in a 1v1 situation. As long as you're paying attention at least, because they still do a lot of damage. The Arcerial explosion is satisfying as hell though. So while we're at it, let's ruin the triumph of our victory by teleporting in a few more insignificant enemies. Okay, that's a bit unfair. These guys actually have a decent chance of harming you and killing you after what you've just been through, because that Warlord is kind of in a dangerous position. If you don't realize what's going on, he will hook you and grab you towards it, and your health will not exactly be on its highest after facing off a duo of berserkers. In the end, however, I'm finding that the most dangerous part of this battle is me using the rocket launcher. Oh, and as a final little dick move, there's a secret in this room. Now during the fight with the berserkers, you probably managed to destroy all the walls, so the one still left standing is kind of conspicuous. However, if you don't, you're going to have one hell of a time finding it. It's also kind of interesting that those three walls are the only cases of indestructible cardboard in the room. It's 100% berserker proof. Now this big fucking climactic monster of a fight, after it that would be a great point to end this level on, wouldn't it? Apparently not. I found it kind of funny that we are climbing up this whole entire giant fucking mountain in order to end up in a cave, but at this point I'm starting to think that the feeling of hopelessness and having achieved absolutely nothing is intentional. Because there's one final trap awaiting Wang, and there's one final slap awaiting the player. If nothing else, the mountain pass is kind of pretty, and no, that split doesn't mean anything, both of the roads lead to the same place, and there is nothing on either of them. So meet the avalanche. I've talked about eggs on the snow before, and here they come in full force. Now this would probably be a rather clever trap if this was the first time we are encountering it, but this level has been preparing us for it in not exactly subtle ways. I don't even know what to say at this point. Maybe some sort of a joke about battles and the monkey sitting up on the hill? I don't know. I would like you to cast your sight towards the building we are inevitably approaching. Yep, that's a cable car station. The entire fucking level could be avoided if Zilla could finish his cable car system before he starts building his fucking castle. Truly, he is an evil genius. I'm getting a semi-useful perk called Medic, which makes medkits heal me up to 20 points over my maximum health. I've never really used it before, but from what I remember of the following levels, scrambling for medkits in a desperate rush to avoid death will most definitely be a thing. So let's get to that fucking cable car. Here's the thing, you're coming full circle. You started in a cable car station, you finish in one, making the entire level feel incredibly pointless. You've achieved nothing, you're where you started. Ouroboros has bitten its tail, and when I die I want to be buried in a grave that says fuck chapter 13.